Ladies and gentlemen, we are slightly delayed. You are welcome to the climate change and health section of this summit. We have 4 presentations this afternoon, and we will have time for questions after all the presentations. The presentations should be less than 10 minutes. I will give a warning to all.
10.
Yeah, I said less than 10, and then there will be 11. Okay? I was asked to read, before we see a short film at the beginning, what the producers of the film wanted to give to you. We will take a trip to a place where very few people live, but actually more penguins, to Antarctica. 14,000 kilometers away from this warm Weltall is the German Polar Research Station Neumayer 3. In perpetual ice, scientists examine climate change, health aspects, and much more. We talked to the climate researcher and the station's director over there. Both are in Antarctica for almost a year and for almost 7 months, completely cut off from the rest of the world. In this time, the only way in and out is a satellite phone. The interview you are about to see tells us about working for science in one of the weirdest places in the world. For technical reasons, we pre-recorded it. The researchers filmed all pictures, especially for us, at the World Health Summit, and our media partner Deutsche Welle edited them for us. Film up, as I can read here.
The Neumayer station is placed on shelf ice, hence the surrounding outside is a flat, white, snowy desert. In the south we can see the mountains Watzmann and Olymp. In the north we have the shelf ice edge and the Edgar Bay, which is currently filled with sea ice. And there also lives the emperor penguin colony. Tell you, walking outside, or better, creeping outside at wind speed of 100 km per hour, having a visibility of a few meters are not really funny and easy, but sometimes necessary.
You have to be able to live in a group with other people, but you have to keep a balance between individuality and community.
I'm starting early in the morning at 5 a.m. and my day shortly ends after midnight. At least once a day I have to go out to check the measurement field. Especially I have to check the radiation instruments to see if there is no and ice free. Additional, I have to launch weather balloons, taking a profile of the atmosphere, of temperature, wind and humidity. And currently I also launching at least 5 ozone zones to take an ozone profile to measure the ozone destruction.
At Neumayer we have the special situation to survey a group of 9 people in an extreme situation. We can measure the effects of polar night and day, the extreme changes of daylight from 3 months with nearly no sunlight to 3 months of 24-hour daylight. And it's very interesting how the physical and cognitive function reacts under these conditions. It's quite a long time in isolation, and we look forward for the first flight to come in for other people by now, and especially for fresh supplies of fruit and vegetable.
We wish you
a productive health summit,
great discussion and good achievements. Bye!
Thank you very much for this impressive film, but as I said earlier in our meeting just half an hour ago, our task would be today to give a push to health being included into the next big treaty within the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This is exactly why we are here today also. I would like to introduce now first Dr. Jutta Litvinovitch. She is head of the division Health Impacts of Climate Change at our Environmental Ministry in Germany. And who else besides you should push this topic? And I was just a few minutes ago talking to a French colleague, and he said, I will have a meeting with Fabius, the head of the Foreign Office in France, and I try to push this topic as well. So please give your introductory remarks to us.
Thank you, Hartmut Graßl. Climate change and health, the German government's view, with a focus on the German position for the climate negotiations in Paris in December. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me to address such a distinguished audience. 2015 is a crucial year for the future of our planet. Now that the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development has been adopted, it is essential that we also adopt a new climate agreement in Paris at the end of the year. A few days ago, global sustainable development goals were agreed on the United Nations Sustainable Development Summit. If implemented in an ambitious way, these will contribute to achieving adequate and sustainable foundations of life for people all around the world. Adaptation to climate change with regard to the population includes protecting health, an issue that has a prominent position in the catalogue and its own goal. The targets on air pollution control, sanitation, and chemicals management will also make a crucial contribution to securing health protection. Just like the UN Summit in New York, the Paris Conference must send a clear message for a global transformation, a joint decision by all countries to pursue a low-carbon and climate-friendly development path. Our key messages and goals for Paris are as follows. We call for a dynamic, modern, and fair climate agreement, a global long-term goal, a mechanism for increasing the level of ambition, and binding sets of rules. Our goal for Paris is therefore to adopt a dynamic, modern, and fair climate agreement that all countries agree to and that enters into force in 2020. Dynamic, so that it can continue developing through its flexible mechanisms for increasing ambition. Modern, so that it can overcome the division between developed and developing countries. And fair, that it can take into account countries' different responsibilities and capacities. And so that it can guarantee support for countries that need it for adaptation and mitigation. There are 4 points that are especially important to us. Firstly, we welcome that more than 100 countries have now submitted their intended nationally determined contributions. These contributions are likely to cover more than 70% of global emissions. This is a very important interim step in the final preparation for Paris. But we need even greater clarity for the final leg. The synthesis report by the UNFCCC Secretariat, which will estimate the global mitigation effect, is particularly important in this regard. We all also urgently call on all the countries that have not yet done so to submit their INDCs. Secondly, the climate agreement needs a global, long-term goal to transpose the 2-degree target into social and economic goals that are easy to communicate and put into practice. This will send a clear signal and will steer investment decisions towards low-carbon energy sources. As a G7, we have adopted the goal of global decarbonization in the course of this century. Brazil has also expressed its support for this goal. Thirdly, the future agreement needs a mechanism for increasing the level of ambition and a robust set of rules. The prerequisite for a fair agreement that creates mutual confidence and trust is clarity and transparency about what countries want to implement. This enables others to understand what is behind contributions and creates trust that they will be actually achieved. It seems likely, however, that the INDCs for Paris will not be enough in total. We need an ambition mechanism with 5-year cycles to close the gap between the INDCs and compliance with the 2-degree limit. Fourthly, we have to ensure that we continue supporting the countries that are most affected by climate change by means of adequate climate financing. It is particularly important to establish climate financing in the new agreement in a way that ensures it encourages increased mitigation and adaptation ambition and promotes the transformational change to a low-carbon and climate-resilient development. Germany remains very optimistic that we will achieve our goals in Paris. Worldwide, the political support for an ambitious climate agreement is greater than ever before. Evidence of this includes the informal climate summit attended by 40 heads of state and government in the margins of the UN Sustainable Development Summit in New York, the US trip of Pope Francis, and the joint presidential statement on climate change issued by US President Obama and the Chinese President Xi. We want to strengthen the political momentum at official events through informal consultation and as part of bilateral cooperation. Most recently, we were able to achieve this during the Indo-German intergovernmental consultations. At the beginning of November, Environment Minister Hendricks will travel to China again to seek support for an ambitious climate agreement. Ambitious climate action equals effective health protection. The health experts in the WHO European region all agree that health is a climate issue. We want to survive. The impacts of climate change can already be felt all over the world, including in Germany. The media shows in images of extreme weather events such as tornadoes, heavy rainfall, snowstorms, heat waves, and of course their impacts, flooding and droughts, resulting in vast economic and social damage. All climate change affects human health, and this change does not stop at national borders. Heat and cold have a direct effect on human mortality and morbidity. Global radiation impacts on human health through ground-level concentration of ozone and UV radiation. Changes in temperature and humidity affect the spread of vectors, pathogens, and substances hazardous to human health, such as allergens and pollutants. Water bodies are also affected. Extreme weather events such as storms, floods, and heavy rainfall can lead to accidents, injuries, deaths, and infectious diseases. WHO predicts that there will be more than 250,000 deaths per year worldwide from 2030 as a result of climate change. The German government attaches great importance to protecting human health. It is one of the key elements of the German strategy for adaptation to climate change from 2008. Germany is also committed internationally. We have been actively supporting efforts by WHO European countries since 2008 through numerous projects, workshops, network building activities. Together with the UK, Germany chairs the WHO European Working Group Health and Climate Change. In 2008, the German government launched the International Climate Initiative. The goal of the Federal Environment Ministry Programme is to promote practical cooperation between developing and developed countries in the field of climate action and biodiversity conservation. We also aim to support countries to develop and establish their own climate policies. Support has by now provided for almost 450 IKI projects geared towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions, adopting of the impacts of climate change and conserving forests and biodiversity. These include 7 pilot projects on health-related adaptation to climate change in 7 countries in southeastern Europe and Central Asia carried out by WHO. Mitigating the impact of anthropogenic climate change has a positive influence on human health. Let me reiterate, climate action equals health protection. Cutting greenhouse gases can save lives, shorten and reduce hospital stays, and achieve enormous cost savings for health systems and civil societies. If we want to survive, we should embrace climate action while at the same time ensuring health sectors become climate neutral. Many people are still unaware of the need for adaptation. One reason may be that they don't feel affected personally. As soon as there is awareness of potential dangers, everyone can take actions to protect their own health and adapt their behavior accordingly. With each and every decision, starting with nutrition, each person significantly influences the state of his or her own health, the state of environmental media, and the state of the planet. Humans are an integral part of the Earth's life cycles, yet they themselves determine the quality of health and the environment. To conclude, I would like to let you know that in Paris, Monaco will be carrying out a side event together with WHO Europe to discuss the importance of a dynamic, modern and fair climate agreement for our health and particularly for the health of our children. You are all cordially invited to take part. Thank you for your interest and stay healthy.
Thank you very much for this introduction. When I read the 8 pages now as a document submitted to all the nations where the word health does not show up at all, and I have realized this again this morning, it is a very huge task for you to bring it into this document jointly with the European nations, and I know that the French will do it as well, and you have said it also. So we have a huge task in front of us. Now we will have a first presentation on the basics of the relation between climate change and human health. What do we scientists know about it? It is Katja Frieler. She is stepping in for John Schellnhuber, but what she presents is a joint work. Please.
So, thank you, and sorry that I'm not John Schellnhuber, but only Katja Frieler. So, the leading question of my talk is whether health concerns can actually foster an agreement end of the year in Paris. And actually, the question was already answered last week by Christine Lagarde in Lima. So she said, if we collectively chicken out of this, we will turn into chickens and we will all be fried, grilled, toasted and roasted. That's a short answer to my question. I will give a slightly longer version now. So if we want to if we want to get an ambitious agreement in Paris at the end of the year, the main emitters have to move. That's currently China, the US, the EU, and India, who are together responsible for more than 60% of the annual CO2 emissions. At least two of them have a serious air pollution problem. So that's a map of the mortality due to outdoor air pollution for the year 2010. In China, it has caused more than 1 million deaths, and in India, it has caused about 500,000. And there's a close link between turning away from fossil fuels and cleaning the air. So this is becoming more and more obvious, and even better, it has become clear that the cost of reducing greenhouse gas emissions will significantly pay off immediately in health co-benefits. So China has already started to move. The last of 4 major coal-fired power plants in the vicinity of Beijing is planned to be shut down next year, and that's only part of a bigger trend within this country. And the health argument is also provides the legal basis for Obama's clean power plan to reduce emissions from the energy sector by 1/3 by 2030. But nevertheless, so far emissions are still increasing, so this is CO2 emissions. And if without mitigation, we will reach about 5 degrees of global warming by the end of the century. That's roughly the difference between the last ice age and the warm period our societies developed in, and that has lasted for more than 10,000 years. This will certainly induce health risks that are of a completely different dimension than the air pollution problem. It will affect the occurrence of extreme events and its direct effects on humans. It will affect the patterns of vector-borne diseases. It will affect water availability and crop yields, and therefore directly food security and migration. And last but not least, it will also affect economic growth and its feedbacks on health. These were projections, but we are already leaving the world as we know it now. So there's already about 0.9 degrees of global warming meanwhile, and it's already out of the range of the experienced warming so far. So what will happen if global temperature continues to increase? I will focus on the extreme event and its physical basic and try to illustrate the health effects by historical examples. So what will happen? One very intuitive guess is that heat waves will become more frequent and more intense. This is a distribution of European summer temperatures over the last 510 years. And what is obvious is that all the warm years fall within the last decade considered within the studies. There were 2 major mega heat waves in 2003 and 2010 with significant health impacts. They are listed here, and the numbers just talk for themselves. And these 2 events were extraordinary, even if we account for the slow increase in global mean temperature due to global warming. The reason is that these both events were not directly, or were not only directly forced by the general trend in global mean temperature rise, but to create such heat waves in mid-latitude, you need the inflow of warm air or air from warmer regions. You need a drying of the soil and a reduction in the associated evaporative cooling, and you need an accumulation of heat over several days. So what you basically need is a quite stable circulation. This ultimately determines the intensity of your heat wave, and that's illustrated here by the jet stream that actually determines the interaction between high and low pressure systems. What we have observed over the last 30 years is a weakening of the mid-latitude summer circulation. And that actually supports the stability of the large-scale circulation patterns and the build-up of heat waves and droughts. It is measured here in the eddy kinetic energy as a measure of the activity of fast-moving Rossby waves and the zonal wind. And there's a strong decline in both indicators. Climate models also show this trend over the 21st century, but it's much weaker. The reason for the discrepancy is not yet clear. The very special circulation pattern in the year 2010 has not only induced the heat wave in Russia, but also severe flooding in Pakistan. That it occurred in parallel and had also quite severe health impacts. Although it's difficult to really directly link this event to climate change, there's a clear trend in the projected people that will be affected by flood events in the future. So this is a plot where we have global mean temperature on the x-axis and the number of people exposed to flood events on the y-axis. And you can see that these numbers are expected to increase considerably. And this is only assuming a fixed pattern of population as today. So it's not accounting for the population increase we expect. At the other end of the range of risks we expect from global climate change are droughts. So they are not only induced by low precipitation, but also by high temperatures, as high temperatures produce higher evaporation and therefore less water will be available. So this is an example from Syria of the year 2008. And there's a long-term decline in precipitation. That's what we see in the first panel over the last century, and an increase in temperatures. Both indicators are combined to calculate a drought index. That's what you see in the third panel, and it indicates a record drought in Syria over the years 2007 to 2010. In 2008, it induced a widespread crop failure and livestock mortality, and left small farmers with a near zero production. This has caused a mass migration from farming families from rural area to cities. It was about 1.5 million people. It was the first time for several years that Syria was forced to import wheat. Unfortunately, at a point in time when wheat prices were extremely high at the global market. So in Syria, the drying is expected to continue. So even if we limit global warming to 2 degrees, there is impact models project reduction of discharge, which is used here as an indicator for water availability, by up to 50%. The drought in Syria has hit an area that was not well prepared at all. So on contrary, the region was weakened by unsustainable agricultural management and an unstable political situation. But that's most likely what we have to expect. So climate change will not only hit a well-prepared, optimal world, it will hit the world as it will be. And let me come back just to my first slide. This is the result from the Climate Action Tracker project we are involved in, where we try to track the actions of the countries within the context of the UN climate negotiations. And we have already used or collected all the pledges, the INDCs that are on the table now, and calculated the new temperature that will be reached under these pledges. And it's the first time since the project has been launched in Copenhagen 2008 that this projected warming has dipped below 3 degrees. So there's some movement, and it's definitely also motivated by health impacts. And that's not yet enough, but there's a movement. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this impressive but also disturbing introductory scientific lecture. We go to the first so-called argument. It is by Sir Andrew Haines from London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and we could already listen to him today, and he will talk about the co-benefits of climate policy making for all health issues. Please.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. So I'm going to develop the argument that's already been mentioned by speakers, that there are many benefits to be had in the near term by acting on climate change. The first slide just illustrates the scale of the challenge for a country like the UK and approximately also Germany. It's based on the work of the UK Committee on Climate Change, and it shows you that by 2050 we really need to reduce our emissions by 80% from 2006. Now that may be conservative, it may be that we should be cutting even deeper than that. But the point of this slide is to illustrate that all of these different sectors shown on this slide, including industry, domestic transport, electricity generation, and others, will all need to contribute to the reductions necessary in order to stabilise the climate. All of these sectors, of course, will bear costs, but many of them will also show benefits, particularly to human health. Those of you who heard Michael Myers speaking earlier today saw this estimate of 7 million deaths per year from WHO from air pollution. But the point that I want to make is that many of them, of course, are intrinsically linked to climate change. Many ambulant particulates, responsible for perhaps 3.7 million deaths or so a year, are linked to the combustion of coal, and obviously internal combustion engines, particularly those based on diesel fuels. And there are a growing number of papers really which document the benefits to health from reducing greenhouse gas emissions and at the same time reducing particulate pollution. So, for example, one paper suggested that moving along a moderate mitigation curve over the next few decades could perhaps save 2.2 million deaths a year by 2100. And we could go even deeper than that and get even bigger benefits. But there are also benefits from household exposure. This is responsible for over 4 million deaths a year. You can't just add the two together because there is some overlap between them, which is why we usually talk about 7 million in total. But household energy and indeed other sources release large amounts of black carbon, which is also a fine particulate, causes health effects. And of course there's very high exposure to women and children. So improving clean energy access in the home and also other strategies which can reduce these short-lived climate pollutants like black carbon can improve health in the near term and also reduce climate change. So we need to address carbon dioxide, which is a long-lasting greenhouse gas. 20% of it or so remains in the atmosphere for 1,000 years, and also these very short-lived climate pollutants like black carbon. And then there's the intermediate ones like methane and tropospheric ozone. Of course, methane is a precursor for ozone. We've already heard that ozone has wide-ranging impacts on human health, and methane is an important greenhouse gas. So again, there's this win-win, this co-benefit opportunity. But ozone and black carbon also have effects on crops, so there's also indirect benefits to human health from reducing them. It's not often appreciated that land use, landscape fires, are also an important cause of death from outdoor air pollution. And this slide shows you the distribution of landscape fire smoke. About 300,000 deaths a year are due to our inhaling landscape fire smoke, much of which is used to clear forests, sometimes to plant palm oil plantations, and so on. And this is a very major public health hazard, including for our colleagues in Singapore, for example, that have very, very high levels of exposure to fine particulates. Of course, this also releases large amounts of greenhouse gas and destroys biodiversity. So increasingly, it's being recognised there are very high costs today of air pollution. This is taken from the new Climate Economy report, which shows you for an economy like China, the health costs may be equivalent to over 10% of their gross domestic product, and very substantial proportions for other economies as well. So it's this growing realization which has led to the increasing evidence that we can benefit health today, we can offset many of the economic costs of fossil fuels, which are often not taken into account in economic projections, and we can also benefit climate. So this is just 3 examples of the health economic benefits of reducing fine particulate air pollution. In the EU, we could get benefits of 38 billion euros a year by 2030, and that's probably conservative. Globally, one estimate suggesting moving from 18% of renewables to 36% of renewables could avoid health costs of 230 billion a year by 2030. And these studies generally have a range of benefits of avoided mortality between 50 and 380 tons of CO2, even more in parts of Asia. So you can see that really many of the benefits of reducing air pollution can offset many of the costs. But it isn't just in terms of the energy sector, it's also in the travel, the urban transport sector particularly. We and others have done a lot of work on developing low-carbon, more sustainable transport strategies for cities, focusing on low-emission vehicles, but also, very importantly, promoting active travel, more walking and cycling. Because in addition to air pollution, one of the big risk factors for non-communicable diseases is, of course, sedentary lifestyle. And about 3.2 million people die every year from sedentary lifestyles. And one of the very few realistic ways of improving population physical activity is by more walking and cycling. And the graph in the bottom of this slide just shows you the projected benefits to our national health system if we could get people in urban England and Wales walking and cycling to the same extent as they do in Copenhagen. So you see big economic benefits, particularly from chronic diseases like diabetes, but also big killers like heart disease, stroke, and some types of cancer. And these would accumulate over time, and they're equivalent to about 25,000 euros, perhaps more, over a 20-year period. So we need to develop low-emission, healthy cities, lower-emission vehicles, more walking, more cycling, more green spaces, which can preserve biodiversity, reduce the urban heat island, and also bring mental health benefits as well. There's also low-carbon buildings, low-emission buildings, and we've also done work showing that you can improve health through reducing emissions of greenhouse gases, reducing indoor air pollution through more efficient ventilation, and dramatically reduce exposure to indoor air pollution at the same time through better housing design and low-energy technologies. Of course, poor populations don't emit as much greenhouse gas emissions as richer populations, but nevertheless, population growth is a challenge. It could grow, population growth, some projections suggest, could be above 10 billion by the end of the century, maybe even more. And so we need to address the kind of human rights issues around population, around 225 million women who want to avoid pregnancy and not using effective contraception. And by providing modern contraception, that could bring the immediate benefit of reducing maternal deaths by perhaps 30%, as well as, in the long term, reducing greenhouse gas emissions and many other pressures on the world's environment. This would only cost about 5 billion a year, very small amounts in international terms. We need to move towards low emission and healthy diets. A lot of the greenhouse gas emissions are driven by the consumption of animal products, and the demand for that is increasing. And we and others have shown that by reducing our dependence on animal products, moving to low emission but healthier diets, we can also reduce ischemic heart disease. We need to develop low carbon and resilient health systems which emit lower greenhouse gas emissions, but also promote healthier lifestyles and provide care closer to home. So finally, is it too expensive to cut emissions? Well, in fact, the International Monetary Fund's assessment suggests that global energy subsidies amount to something like $5 trillion already. Much of that's due to the health benefits of the health impacts of air pollution, and some due to the effects of climate change, as well as some of the direct subsidies. Health and other co-benefits can help to offset the costs of decarbonising the world economy, which have been estimated to be only $1 trillion, so relatively much, much smaller. So in conclusion, climate change threatens to undermine the last half-century of health gains. Tackling climate change could be the greatest global health opportunity of the 21st century. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this enlightening short lecture. The next argument will be given by Mademoiselle Sorgo from Burkina Faso, and she will be introduced by Rainer Sauerborn. Please, Rainer.
Good afternoon. Can I have the first slide? Okay, let's assume you are the COP conference and this is the room like here in Paris, and what would I tell the heads of delegation why health is important? I would say we have positive messages. We heard one by Andy, and that's the second. Health co-benefits are huge and need to be put in the risk-benefit analysis. Then the second positive argument is health is what moves people, what can be a terrain d'entente in negotiations, a common ground. And since we are talking about the future generations, why would a graying male northerner talk about this? So I invite a young female doctoral student from Burkina Faso to come to bring across that point. Why should we care about health in climate change? Please rise up. The floor is yours.
Good evening. My name is Raisa Sorgo. Sorgo like the millet plant grown in my home country of Burkina Faso. I'm 23 years old and I work in climate change and health research. I'm here today to remind you of the future we jeopardize with delayed climate action. I'm well aware that many of you have papers and publications much older than myself, but I'm also aware that we all have an invested interest in using health as a motivator. This slide is from the 2013 IPCC report. It shows modeled global temperature increases. I'll first draw your attention to the x-axis of the figure, which goes until 2,300. This is because the effects of CO2 emitted today will be lengthy and persistent. The y-axis shows increasing temperature. The blue line is business as usual. This will lead us by 2100 to the 4-degree world, which the World Bank has warned us against. The red, green, and purple lines are trajectories which can be achieved with legislation and policy. This here is my father, Gaston Sorgo. The CO2 he participates directly and indirectly in emitting will not only have an effect on my generation, but on future generations to come. Although his generation will experience relatively low health impacts, he will leave myself, my children, my grandchildren, and future generations to bear the brunt of the increasing burden of disease. Overall, this graph shows us that now is the time to decide which of these RCP pathways we will adopt. This choice will be based on the decisions, policies, and legislations our governments decide on during important milestones such as the COP21 conference. Let's join together to change climate policy for the health of our children. Thank you.
Ja? Ach, geht einfach weiter. Ja? No, keep going. The presentation continues. This was a nested kangaroo presentation.
Yes,
if you like.
but in order to keep time, I also have to warn you that we are running out of time. So Rainer will give arguments 3 and 4 now, which is on end of adaptation and changes in work productivity by mean global warming. Rainer, it is 12.
I'm the last, I know.
You are the last, and we should have at least a few minutes for questions.
Thank you, Hartmut. I will do my best. So the main thing is the green, is the positive message, ladies and gentlemen, in the COP21. But here are some guardrails or warning signs. And the first one is limits of adaptation, and the second is the loss of productivity due to work. This is what we did in the IPCC, a qualitative assessment of figuring out what could be adapted away by health systems in 2100 in a 4 degrees world. And you see a star with the various sectors of health impact, and 5, like undernutrition, is maximum impact, and the red part can be adapted away. So we are left with substantial health damage, and no health system in the world can protect the population that you are representing, Madam and Misters and ladies and gentlemen of the COP21. That's for whom I'm addressing here. So there are limits, and we can't help you. There is no way we can adapt away the damages, health damages of 4 degree change. That's the last argument. It's also a warning argument. It's the work productivity in already hot countries, whether you are a sugarcane cutter in Costa Rica or a construction worker in India, or whether you're working in a non-air-conditioned shoe factory in Vietnam. And this is the hard fact. This is not projected temperature. This is temperature average of the last 30 years. And the hottest month of the last 30 years are projected here. And you have already, if you see the legend here, you have already countries that have 30 degrees for a series of time. And these are not heat waves. It is the average of the hottest month. And the left bottom, I wonder if you can see it, you see the physiological law, and this is what we need to tell policymakers. There's a physiological law that you go above 26, you already cannot cut any trees anymore. You cannot do 500 watt activities. And even if you're going beyond 30 degrees, you can't do normal writing, very light work. And you see the decline. So in 1 degree temperature change, you have 50% of additional rest time required. That is a huge cut in the industry of these populations, and I'm not talking for the moment about health damages, I'm talking about health-based economic damages. 59% of the economic loss of climate change in these countries will be due to lost productivity and not treatment costs or whatever. And that can amount to 2 to 8% of GDP, and we're talking about a time horizon of 230. So I summarized the key messages of the entire panel. Health is a motivator, thank you, Raisa, for climate policy, a few here at COP21, and for our personal behavior in our families and households. There are huge co-benefits, thank you, Andy, to have sorted. Society has absolute limits of adaptation, that's the warning sign. And the human body will be forced to decrease labor productivity in hot and poor countries. The health of our children is the key motivator. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rainer, for giving us the opportunity for questions and also bringing up a major topic. When we traveled in 1989 to tropical forest countries as a commission of the German Parliament, I was always asking the authorities, have you thought about loss of work productivity when you get a 1 degree warming in your humid inner tropics? And the answers were always, I don't know. Now we are in a situation to tell them that this is a very, very serious matter. I would like to ask our German delegate now, what is your strategy to get this topic still in 2 months into the Paris Protocol? We need a strategy. We are a very small group here compared to those who have to act. And we will have 20,000 people at least in Paris and maybe 2,500 members of delegations. what is your strategy to get this done? It was a nice discussion. We all can agree to what you said. But how can we get it? Please.
May I answer?
Yeah?
Well, at the beginning, I just want to add that we had a study that was commissioned from the National Meteorological Service, and it revealed that mortality resulting from coronary heart disease in the first decade of this century in Germany increased by an average of 10 to 15% during heat waves. And without adaptation, the expected increase and intensity of heat waves will lead to a factor increase of 3 to 5. And as I mentioned before, we take health protection in Germany as a very important topic, and it's one of the key elements we have been focusing on from the Ministry of Environment since 2008 within our German adaptation strategy. We have launched the international, the EKI, where we really launched so far 450 projects to help other countries also to join our way and path to go on the mitigation and on the other column of the adaptation, so that we are aware of the different problems we have to face. But on the other hand, of course, we are not alone, and we just have to organize already within the European member states to come up to an agreement. And for this, we are so far very happy that we have an ambitious, modern, a fair position for us to go to Paris. And of course, from the environmental side, humans are part of the environment. You can't really divide environment and human health. We are all one health,
yeah.
One world.
Thank you. Are there points to be made by the members of the podium, or should we ask the audience now? Are there really burning issues? And I see Bettina Menne, she wants to speak to us, and maybe you tell us how WHO is pushing for this.
Yeah, thanks very much for giving the floor to me. I just would like to inform you that WHO has launched a campaign last week, and it's a call for action, and you can find it on www.who.int. We would like you all to sign, and the messages are a strong and effective action to limit climate change and avoiding unacceptable risks to global health, scaling up financing for adaptation to climate change, including the public health measures needed, an action that both reduces climate change and improves health, including reduction of cancer, cardiovascular diseases and respiratory diseases that are caused by air pollution. Please sign. It's on our website. Please sign. And we hope that as many doctors, as many health professionals as possible will be signing, so that Margaret Chan can submit it in Paris to the respective head of the OCOP. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Please, questions also to the presenters.
Does it work? My name is...
Please.
My name is Yves Sharp, Professor of Demography, University Paris Descartes, and member of Centre Virchow-Villermé. Professor Haines mentioned the issue of reproductive rights. The question and the strategy, talking of strategy, which we adopted with a group of parliamentary deputies, would be to insert human rights within a more global approach which would cope with the autonomy of women. And we found that discussing autonomy of women, education, access to land property would be a far more efficient means to convince decision makers that the best way to do would be to have women escape the trap of being highly vulnerable people and groups, and rather convince them that they can be very efficient actors, as all field experiences reveal. Thank you very much. And this is part of the report which will be handed to Fabius on 16/10. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can Sir Andy comment on this, please?
Well, I agree very, very strongly with it. I think we also have to think about intergenerational rights as well, I think, and our responsibilities for future generations. So as well as today's women, we need to think about the future generations, as was made clear. And I think at the moment, in the public health sphere, we don't have a very good way of taking into account the rights of future generations to health. So you could argue that the good health of our generation has been largely built by exploiting the environment in unsustainable ways, and in doing so we're undermining the health for future generations. And I think this is something which really needs to have much greater debate and discussion within the public health field.
Thank you. More questions, please? In the back as well? Yes, please, go ahead.
My name is Michelle Alsanter, and I have a question to the presenter from Syria. The situation there, isn't it such that the lack of agricultural success has to do with dams and dikes that have been built in the past 10 years and not solely due to drought?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's definitely a mixture, and that's why I said the drought has hit an area that was not at all well prepared. There's an unsustainable agriculture management before, and a use of fossil water, for example, and that has all contributed to the situation there. But it's also the drought, and there's a continued drying trend that we expect. So it will be a mixture of all these effects in the end.
Thank you. More questions?
Can I make an announcement?
Yes, please.
You may have seen while queuing up for the... It's already on, sorry. While queuing up for the lunch break, that we have a MOOC on exactly that topic, which follows the 1, 2, 3, 4 arguments. It's a MOOC on why health is important in climate negotiations in Paris. So you can download it, you have flyers there, you can even take it home on a USB stick. So as you walk out, there are 2 stands, and there's also a lot of material on the website if you want to dig deeper. That would be a very nice opportunity. Thank you.
Rainer said we should walk out, but I would warn you, please do not walk out, because the next meeting is immediately after ours. There is no break in between. So you have to shift the MOOC presentation a bit, 1 hour further. Yeah. When they walk out in 2 hours, he said, but it is only 1 hour. Yeah, there is one more question, and then I have as moderator to stop this discussion, because we should not eat too much into the cake of the others.
Oh, hello, my name is Clara Maveglia from Cultural Entrepreneurship Institute here in Berlin. I have a suggestion or an appeal. You can say what you think about. Since we are all scientists, and of course medical doctors, but also all kinds of scientists, and we are also around at conference all around the world, so we could doesn't matter how specialized the conference is, since climate change is important for all of us. Just say a couple of sentences to that at the beginning of every, as specialized as you like, talk. Thank you for that.
Thank you. A very good point. But you need to be aware of the problems before you talk about these. And my experience was about 20 years ago, Rainer and myself, we tried to launch one of these topics within a committee established by the federal government of Germany, and we were not successful, even among scientists. Now it's very clear, but my last point, when I see scenarios increasing temperature by 4 to 5 degrees, I call them horror scenarios. But in reality, if climate change is such a major threat, we will not reach it because our economic system would start in parts to collapse. But we scientists are still not in a position to clearly state under which conditions, which economic drawdown would occur. That's why I hate these horror scenarios, and we scientists take them too serious. We should too serious with 4 and 5 degrees. We will not reach these degrees if there is any real threat due to climate change. But we will have a partial collapse of our civilization beforehand. This is my point I would like to make here. And I could now continue with another horror, which would mean in climate history there was always a very clear relation between temperature changes and sea level change. It was 20 meters per degree. 20 meters per degree. Why are we talking about only 1 meter in this century? Because the system is quite slow in reactions, but it will not stop. So a major threat in this system is built in over hundreds of years or even thousands of years. This has not been mentioned today in our deliberations. And I hope that this pushes the health issue even stronger in Paris. Thank you.